Welcome to Part 3 in our Vendor 1099 reporting series. In Part 1, we reviewed 1099 form box setup. In Part 2, we made edits and adjustments directly from the Vendor 1099 list. Today, we'll add individual vendors to the Vendor 1099 list and import payment amounts for multiple vendors. As in Parts 1 and 2 of this series, I'll use Quick Start V1 to go to the Vendor 1099 activity. This takes us to Processes Tax Reporting Vendor 1099, which we can also get to through the activity tree by going to Processes, Tax Reporting, and Vendor 1099. I'll build my list with no filters because I'm still wanting to see all vendor data for the 2017 calendar year. Sorting by the 1099 name column 1, I can see that vendor MobyMax is not being included. This vendor had payments made outside of the software, and I want to make sure they're included on the 1099. To do this, I click on the New button. This opens a blank form. Please note that this doesn't create a new vendor in the software. It adds a new row of data to the 1099 reporting table for an existing vendor. All of the adjustment fields on the form are unlocked so that we can put the amounts in the correct box. I'll search for my vendor by entering the first couple letters and using the F4 button or the drop-down to choose my vendor. This pulls in the tax identification and address information from the vendor record. Next, I enter my adjustment reason, paid from prior software. From there, I can enter the adjustment amount, and I'll enter that in box 7 for $785. This is non-employee compensation. When I save close this form, we'll see the vendor on the list. MobyMax with an adjustment amount of $785 and a status of needed for the 1099. Adding one vendor to the Vendor 1099 list is easy, but it would be time-consuming to do this process for multiple vendors. If you have many vendors who have adjustment amounts or you need to import data for, we can use the task Import Data. You might be asking why a user would have a lot of information that's not already being reported in the schoolAbility software. Two of the main reasons are the district or school changed financial software partway through the calendar year, and the amounts by vendor aren't in the current software. Or the district or school imports vendor payment data from an associated student body or parent-teacher organization, prints the 1099 forms, and does the 1099 IRS reporting for those organizations. Before using the import task, we need to create our file. We'll start by going to Online Resources and choosing Templates. This takes us to a web page that includes templates for all import activities within the schoolAbility software. Choosing the 1099 import option downloads an Excel file to your computer that includes a header row and one row of sample data. To save time, I've already downloaded the template and added data to import. We'll go ahead and flip over to that file. The file must include the org ID and the calendar year, along with the vendor ID. The vendor ID column must include the leading zeros. To do this, I right-click on the column and use Format Cells to set custom formatting. Entering 6 zeros indicates that the number in this column must be 6 digits. The next 8 columns are for the 1099 form boxes. The final column is EIN, or Employer Identification Number. This is your tax identification number, not that of the vendor. This column should be left blank unless you have vendors who need to be reported under a different employer tax ID than the one set up in the system. I'll add an additional vendor to this list. I enter the org ID, calendar year, and vendor ID 10016. This is a charter bus vendor. Earlier in the year, the district chartered a bus and paid $600 for bus driver services and $1,600 for the bus rental. Once my file is ready, I'll save it as a CSV file, which I've already done in this case, and we'll go back to our vendor 1099 list. I'll choose the task to import data and select the file type I want to import. When the import is complete, a dialog box lets me know the import was successful, how many rows were imported, and the file name. We click OK to go back to the search form. We press Go to rebuild the list and pick up the changes we've made. Our list has updated with the imported amounts. It's important to note that using the import task overrides any previous imported data. Use one file and add to that file as needed, importing the entire file each time. On my updated Vendor 1099 list, I'll perform the same steps as I did in part 2 of this series, reviewing my vendors and correcting things such as incorrectly formatted or missing tax IDs. This concludes part 3 of our Vendor 1099 reporting series. Please join us for part 4, where we print our 1099 forms, learn to edit once printed, and generate the 1099 IRS file. We welcome your comments, feedback, and questions at support@schoolAbility.com.